Hi, this is Terry. Welcome back to my channel. We just celebrated Mother's Day and it was a really good one. I got some super great new UGG slippers because my other ones were
disgusting,
old and disgusting, and it was time to replace them. And Ray made me this beautiful box to replace my crumbling tiara box. So now I have a handcrafted tiara box, because don't you need a place to put your tiaras too? Am I the only one? I mean, I do have one in my glove box, and you should too. But I also have a box of about half a dozen other ones, in addition to the one that's right back there. That one might be my favorite one. And then Adam, of all people, my dear son, brought me roses from work with a cute little card. I was totally blown away, and it was a good day. I think maybe one of the best parts is I found a picture of a brunch board, which is essentially a charcuterie board, but with pancakes and sausage and bacon and fruit and all sorts of toppings. And was it fun, Ray, to put that together?
Oh, it was super fun. I like all sorts. I like assembling like the cheese boards and the brunch boards and stuff. It's fun to make something pretty out of food.
Yeah.
That will promptly be demolished by lucky party goers.
And what's really great is in COVID-19 community, platters are like the ideal thing.
Definitely.
Well, if we're going to get sick, we'll get sick fast. Adam unfortunately had to work, but it was just, but it was great. It was me and Zeke, Ray, and Sophie. And so it was good. And we all piled into the car after Adam got home from work and drove down to San Jose, which is about 35 minutes away without traffic. And we were able to say hello to my parents from a distance and catch up with them. I don't think Adam has seen them since January. I brought Sophie and Ray down. Well, Zeke, Ray, and I visited last weekend, and then I took Sophie and Ray down a couple of weeks ago. And I think it's good. I feel very fortunate that I'm able to check in with my parents, and I don't have to provide them with any support other than emotional support and not arguing with my dad, which recently has become a lot easier. So it was good, but I was reminded my mom has low iron in her blood, and this has been a problem she's been trying to deal with the last couple of years, and has gone in for some iron infusions in order to boost it up. Apparently the chocolate-covered raisins she's eating every day are not enough to boost her iron, so she needs to have some infusions. And it was really scary for her. Other than that, she's a healthy 70-year-old woman. And she was a little scared about going in to have the blood tests done. And then on Wednesday, she's going in for the actual infusion. And I would agree that I think it's a scary proposition to go into a healthcare facility right now. And I was talking with my neighbor Pam the other day about how we are wondering what the ripple effect is going to be by people not able to get in to see their healthcare professionals, whether it is their doctors or their dentists for either ongoing checkups, preventive care, or even some treatments. I know a lot of clinical trials have not been able to enroll new patients. They're not able to treat patients. And so there are some experimental drugs that are needing to go through clinical trials. And right now, if there are drugs involved, or there are site visits that are involved, or pre-testing type things that require visiting healthcare facilities, these things have come to a screeching halt. I watched a really interesting webinar. It was a live webinar on decentralization of clinical trials on Friday. And there's technology that is getting put into place that some people have been trying to put into place for a number of years to make it so that we could potentially use technology to get access to a more diverse group of patients for clinical trials, as well as maybe increase the quality of the data that's being captured, and really change maybe the way that clinical trials are structured. And the good thing about COVID, not that there are that many good things, is that this is really forcing both like life sciences companies as well as regulatory agencies like the FDA to really take a look at new ways to handle clinical trials, determine endpoints for, regulatory submissions to show that it's both safe and effective at certain dosages within certain populations. And I'm sure a lot of you, unless you're in like the biotech or med device space, really don't fully understand how all of that works. It's very complicated. It's very time consuming, and it's very, very expensive in order to make sure that there are safe and effective drugs and medical devices out on the market. But getting back to my point around my concern that because people are putting off going into healthcare facilities, people are putting off preventive, people are putting off actually curative type care, and I think we're going to have a negative ripple effect in the healthcare system. My dentist rescheduled from my May 13th appointment to June 6th, and I have a feeling that a lot of these healthcare providers are going to be working a lot of extra days in order to try to not only make up for the reduced number of patients they can see in a day, but also try to get in as many patients as possible. So I feel for my dentist and one of my good friends, Carliza. I look forward to seeing her on June 6th, but I also worry about her health and safety mentally and physically, as well as that of her staff, as we try to phase back into some sort of, ability to get access to healthcare. So, I have a new doctor. I have put off seeing him. I had blood work done at the early part of March. Got the results. He called me to say, hey, here's something to pay attention to. And I think, I'm back to taking vitamin D because my vitamin D was low. My cholesterol, I don't really care about right now. And, but I just pushed off my appointment with him again until the first week of June. I made a list in my journal today about the first things that I'm going to do when things open back up, or the things that I want to do. First is going to be the hair, because the roots, whew, goodness gracious. Although I kind of like the length. It's not looking too bad, but it's needing some highlight touch up. I'd love to have a facial. I need to get into my dentist. I need to deal with the 50-year-old colonoscopy thing, but I think I'm going to do Cologuard and not an actual colonoscopy. I hope the doctor's into that, because that's what I plan to do. I'm not at risk. May as well give new technology a try. Not looking forward to the, whatever poop sampling thing I'm going to have to do at home, but I think that's better than what I witnessed my husband deal with his colonoscopy a couple of weeks ago. So I'm concerned about the healthcare thing. I'm concerned about the impact on on people with issues and people who don't have issues. What about those women who weren't going in for the breast screening and then turned out that they end up having, it takes a while longer to be able to get in for that screening, and then maybe it's either too late or very late in the process and we could have caught it earlier. And yes, I've seen some people argue on Twitter that it's not that big of a deal and a couple months isn't going to make that big of a deal. Well, I think if you're struggling to make that appointment to begin with, and then you have to push that appointment off, and for some reason there's fear around it, you may push it off even longer. And if you're afraid of getting sick by going into a healthcare facility and you push it off for another 6 months, there are real life consequences associated with that, and I have concerns about that. Right? You thought about that at all?
I was still stuck on the fact that you're paying attention to arguments on Twitter, because that's just a nightmare and a half. You don't want to go onto Twitter if you want actual educated debates.
Well, it's interesting to see what people are talking about, what people are thinking in 250 characters. It's just, I have to take a breath, and I try to do it 5 minutes at a time, maybe once or twice a day. And I realize the pain and suffering I'm subjecting myself to. So I know what I'm going into, and I'm okay with that. And sometimes I fight back. Sometimes I engage, but
No, Mom. No.
Speaking of engaging, so I was listening to Secret Lives of Black Women podcast the other day, and they had this amazing woman. I don't remember her name, but she is a Black trans woman. And so obviously a lot of things came up around gender, sexuality, also came up around racial issues, because there's a lot of intersectionality within that. And one of the things she talked about is how much of a gendered world we live in. And so this has always got me thinking, especially after conversations with Ray, is what does a non-gendered world look like? It is so completely the opposite of what it is that we're dealing with, or that we're living in, the reality. I can't even imagine what that looks like. And where I jump to with that is I do so much to advocate for and promote for the equality and equity with women, that if we remove gender, do we automatically have equality? Do we automatically have equity? And I think the answer is no, and it's more of it's a transition over time. But it's got me thinking a lot about what that world would look like. Because remember, I'm a logistics person. You throw something out there and I'm like, let's think about how that happens and what that looks like and how we achieve that. And of course I also go to, well, there are a bunch of different barriers, and obstacles, not saying that we shouldn't try to get there, because I think we should. And the other thing that came up as a part of that, and in some of the things I've been thinking about, is about racial equality. Now, first and foremost, we are all part of the human race. So technically there's only one race. And so when people talk about the different races, I mean, there's really only one race. And I don't know what the word is when we're talking about, skin color. Oh, speaking of which, on Twitter, there was a whole other thing that was like, stop calling out and saying something about white people this and white people that without like segregating out. And I was thinking, well, a lot of people just say Black people or Asian people or Indian people. And these are a lot of white people doing it. And probably the same ones who's like, don't group me with all of the other white people. And yet they tend to do the grouping of other people with different skin colors or cultural identities. And
that is what we call hypocrisy and double standards.
Yes. And I just, it makes my head want to just explode when I see those hypocrisies and double standards. And I want to call them out, but it's really hard to do on Twitter with 250 characters. So,
and also it's just not worth your time.
Exactly. So I use it to inform some of my thoughts around the work that I'm trying to do to really advocate for and promote equality and equity with all women, and making that as inclusive as possible. And which, I'm working on my next book, working title, Piloting to Power, and trying to be as inclusive as possible, but also knowing that if I make the audience too broad for the book, I'm going to completely miss. So continuing to narrow that down, but also knowing, keeping in mind who I can impact and who I can't, who's going to be interested in listening to me, cisgendered, straight, white woman, privileged, liberal from the Bay Area, married to a cisgendered, straight, white man. So, I don't know, just continuing to think about all of this. And last night at dinner, I posed the question. It's like, because I saw on Twitter again.
Good Lord, Mother.
I saw
Are you
Twitter.
sure you only spend like 10 minutes a day on
I
this
read
site?
quickly. But there over and over, there were questions of like, what are you white people doing to raise kids to not perpetuate the racial inequalities? And I was thinking through, and so some people responded back with various different things, and they're like, but what are you doing? How are you teaching them? What are you doing? And it seemed like the responses from a lot of the white people were like platitudes, and they were very general. And so last night at dinner, I posed the question, and we didn't get very far with it, but I think we're going to continue to have these conversations so that we can be more actively involved in really trying to make change, especially in light of the recent murder of the young Black man. Is that in Georgia? I don't know, somewhere in the South, who was out going for a jog and was brutally murdered by two white men who are being portrayed in the news as father-son. And when I hear father-son, because it was a white father and a white son, I think of 35-year-old and a 5 or 8-year-old. I don't think of two grown-ass men. And I don't like the way that the headline portrayed that. And so I responded back to something on Twitter, and a black woman pointed out, she said it's important to highlight the generational, how this is generational. And I thought, well, that's really great, but there's no way that if a black father and a black son murdered a young white man, they would be portrayed as thugs in the headlines. I don't think there was any thought to the generational thing, and I think it's just we automatically go to protect those that are more like us than not. And so I think it's important to call these things out, and figure out what we can do to really try to move the needle on something that is just horrifying and infuriating and not surprising, but it should be surprising. Any thoughts, Ray?
You're preaching to the choir right now, Mom. It's infuriating, and we need to do something, but it's really hard to figure out what to do. So, yeah, we're going to be having more conversations at the dinner table and stuff.
And I want us to be more active about it.
At the same time, we can't fight every battle.
No, we can't fight every battle, but I think that, there are a couple, reproductive rights for women is one of those that we're definitely fighting with doing stuff with Planned Parenthood. I think this is one that we need to use our white privilege to move forward. Mm-hmm. And then the women thing is, that's... The woman thing. That's something that is near and dear to my heart. I was so excited. I got on a call this morning with a potential vendor for a client on something, and the CEO and president was a woman. And she responded. I was on a chat thread on her site on Saturday, and she responded. I didn't know she was the CEO. And then today I looked at LinkedIn. I'm like, of course the CEO is responding on a Saturday during, to make sure that she's handling all sales stuff. So anyway, it was delightful. She started her company in 1996, and it was pretty fun to have a woman on that call. Anyway, Ray is tapping their watch to show that it's time for me to wrap this up. I hope that you are all doing okay. Today was the end of 8 weeks of sheltering in place.
Good Lord, really?
We have 3 more weeks to go. So with that, thanks for watching or listening. Thank you for subscribing. And as always, take some risks, let go of perfection, and above all else, have some fun.
And stay home, please.
Well, not every state is having to stay home, and some countries are opening up. So just be safe with how you are interacting with other people.